The last pharaoh of Egypt was found dead in her chamber in August 30th BCE, her body unmarked, her servants dying beside her, and the Roman conquerors already inside the palace walls. For 2,000 years, historians have accepted the serpent's bite. But the evidence tells a far stranger story. The doors splinter under Roman shoulders, and the soldiers pour into darkness. Torchlight catches gold first, then silk, then stillness. Cleopatra VII lies upon her ceremonial couch, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, the sacred cobra gleaming at her brow, her robes arranged with precision no dying woman could achieve alone. Her face holds an expression of absolute peace. Beside the couch, Iras has already crumpled to the stone floor. Charmion kneels at the queen's feet, fingers trembling as she adjusts the royal diadem one final time. A Roman officer surveys the scene and asks if this was well done. Charmion's voice comes thin but defiant. "Extremely well," she whispers, "and fitting for a queen descended from so many kings." Then she falls. The soldiers search the chamber with growing unease. They find no serpent coiled in corners, no blood upon the floor, no wound upon any body. The windows are too narrow for a cobra to pass. The doors were sealed from within, yet guards stood posted outside through every hour. The queen's skin shows nothing, no puncture, no bruise, no sign of violence. She appears not dead, but sleeping. Octavian's men have witnessed battlefields and executions, but this scene unsettles them in ways they cannot name. Something here has been carefully arranged. Someone wanted this tableau discovered exactly as it appears. The question that will haunt historians for 2,000 years begins in this silence. How did she die? And whose hand truly guided her final breath? And now, before this story unfolds further, may I take a small portion of your time and subscribe to this channel. Join thousands of history lovers on this journey through time. If this tale has earned your attention, a like and a comment go a long way. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? These stories have traveled centuries to reach you. Let us continue. In the days before Cleopatra's death, Octavian faced a calculation that would shape the ancient world. He had entered Alexandria as conqueror, his legions occupying the city his adopted father Julius Caesar had once fought to control. The queen was his prisoner, confined within her own palace under constant watch. On the surface, his path seemed clear. Parade her through Rome in chains, display the fallen queen before jeering crowds, cement his triumph over the East for all time. No spectacle could match a living Cleopatra dragged behind his chariot. Yet Octavian understood dangers others might miss. This woman had bent two of Rome's greatest commanders to her will. Caesar had placed her statue in his temple. Antony had abandoned wife and country for her embrace. Even in defeat, she radiated a power that unsettled him. Worse still were the children. Caesarion bore the blood of Julius Caesar himself, a living challenge to Octavian's claim as sole heir. The twins and young Ptolemy carried Antony's legacy forward. A living Cleopatra might become a symbol for every enemy Rome possessed. Octavian assigned his freedman Epaphroditus to guard her, officially to prevent suicide. But the ancient sources grow strangely vague about what followed. Octavian visited the queen personally behind closed doors. No record survives of their words. When Cleopatra emerged, she seemed certain of her fate, convinced she would suffer public humiliation in Rome. Within days, she lay dead by her own hand, or so the official account would claim. Every historian who recorded these events wrote under Octavian's reign as Augustus, their words shaped by imperial patronage and survival. 40 years before her death, Cleopatra entered a world already soaked in blood. She was born in 69 BCE to the Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals who had claimed Egypt 3 centuries prior. By her birth, the dynasty had rotted from within. Her father, Ptolemy III, mockingly called Auli, or the flute player, sat upon a throne built on Roman bribes and family murder. He had already executed one daughter for rebellion and watched another briefly seize his crown. The palace corridors whispered with conspiracy. Every sibling was a rival. Every advisor a potential assassin. Every meal a possible last. Yet within this nest of vipers, young Cleopatra found weapons of her own. She grew up in the Mausoleon, Alexandria's legendary library complex, where the greatest minds of the Mediterranean gathered. While her siblings plotted, she studied. She mastered 9 languages and became the only Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years who spoke Egyptian. She learned philosophy from Greek scholars, astronomy from Babylonian priests, medicine from the finest physicians of the age. Most significantly, she studied toxicology. The royal archives contained detailed records of poisons gathered across centuries, their symptoms, their timing, their antidotes, the precise doses required to kill. This knowledge would follow her to the grave. The halls smelled of papyrus and incense. Greek and Egyptian voices mingled in corridors lined with 500,000 scrolls. Cleopatra absorbed it all while watching her siblings with calculating eyes. She was learning not just scholarship, but survival. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BCE, he left his throne to 2 children bound by Ptolemaic tradition in marriage. Cleopatra was 18 and already formidable. Her brother Ptolemy XIII was 10 years old and controlled entirely by his regents, ambitious men who saw the young queen as an obstacle. For 3 years, the siblings shared an uneasy crown, while the regents consolidated power around the boy king. Then, they struck. Cleopatra was driven from Alexandria, expelled from her own palace by ministers who believed they had ended her story. They underestimated her completely. She fled east to Syria, where she called upon allies and mercenaries, gathering an army through sheer force of will. By 48 BCE, she had camped at Egypt's eastern border with troops loyal to her alone. A queen without a kingdom, perhaps, but far from defeated. Then, fortune delivered an opportunity no one could have predicted. Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria pursuing his rival Pompey, only to find Pompey already murdered by Ptolemy's regents, seeking Roman favor. Caesar occupied the palace, and Cleopatra needed to reach him before her brother's advisors poisoned his mind against her. She could not march through Alexandria openly, so she had herself wrapped in a linen sack and carried through enemy streets by a single trusted servant. When the bundle was unrolled before Caesar, a 21-year-old queen emerged, bold and brilliant and utterly unbroken. Within months, she would ally with Roman legions to destroy her own brother. This was not a woman who left anything to chance. Caesar had come to Alexandria chasing a defeated rival, but found himself trapped in a war not his own. The fighting proved savage beyond expectation. Street battles raged through the ancient city. Fire spread to the harbor district and consumed part of the great library's warehouses. Scrolls of irreplaceable knowledge turning to ash. Roman soldiers nearly drowned when Egyptians cut their ships loose in the harbor. Caesar himself swam for his life through waters thick with enemy vessels. Yet slowly, Rome's military discipline prevailed. Reinforcements arrived, and the tide turned against young Ptolemy XIII. The boy king died fleeing across the Nile, drowned in armor too heavy for his 13-year-old body. Caesar placed Cleopatra upon the throne she had nearly lost, married now to her youngest brother Ptolemy XIV, who was too young to threaten her power. But a far more significant bond had formed between the queen and the conqueror. Cleopatra carried Caesar's child. In 47 BCE, she gave birth to Ptolemy XV, called Caesarion by the Alexandrians, Little Caesar. This boy represented something unprecedented: the blood of Rome's greatest general joined to Egypt's ancient dynasty. 2 years later, Cleopatra traveled to Rome itself, where Caesar installed her in his private villa across the Tiber. He placed her golden statue in the Temple of Venus Genetrix, alongside the goddess herself. Roman aristocrats watched with mounting horror. Caesar's own wife suffered public humiliation. Senators whispered of Eastern corruption, of kingship, of a foreign queen bending Rome's dictator to her will. Among those watching was an 18-year-old named Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew, quietly calculating from the shadows. On the Ides of March in 44 BCE, 23 daggers rose and fell on the Senate floor. Julius Caesar collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue, his blood pooling across marble, while his killers proclaimed liberty restored. Across the city, Cleopatra received word that her protector, her lover, the father of her child, lay murdered by men who hated everything she represented. The queen understood immediately that Rome had become her death trap. The assassins included senators who despised her influence and blamed her for Caesar's ambitions of kingship. She gathered her infant son and fled within weeks, sailing back to Alexandria before the chaos could consume her. Upon returning, she moved with characteristic ruthlessness. Her brother-husband, Ptolemy XIV, died suddenly, and ancient sources whisper the obvious conclusion. Poison had always been a Ptolemaic tradition. With the boy eliminated, Cleopatra elevated 3-year-old Caesarion as her co-ruler, publicly proclaiming him the son and heir of divine Julius. This declaration sent tremors through Rome, where a young man named Octavian had just learned Caesar's will, named him as adopted son and primary heir. 2 boys now claimed Caesar's legacy. Only one could survive. Meanwhile, Rome tore itself apart. Octavian joined with Mark Antony and Lepidus to form the Second Triumvirate, unleashing proscriptions that murdered thousands. The Republic drowned in blood as territories changed hands and armies clashed across the Mediterranean. Cleopatra watched from Alexandria with calculating patience. Egypt's wealth would determine which Roman ultimately prevailed. She simply needed to choose correctly. In 41 BCE, Mark Antony commanded Rome's eastern territories with absolute authority. He summoned the Egyptian queen to Tarsus in Cilicia, demanding she answer charges of supporting Caesar's assassins. The accusation was false but useful, a demonstration of Roman power meant to humble a client monarch. Cleopatra understood the game perfectly and chose to rewrite its rules entirely. She arrived not as a supplicant begging forgiveness, but as a goddess descending upon mortals. Plutarch preserved eyewitness accounts of what the people of Tarsus saw that day. Her barge sailed up the Cydnus River with purple sails billowing and silver oars cutting the water in rhythm to flutes and pipes. The stern blazed with hammered gold that caught the afternoon sun. Cleopatra herself reclined beneath a spangled canopy dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love made flesh. Beautiful boys costumed as cupids fanned her, while girls adorned as sea nymphs attended the rigging. Clouds of incense rolled from the vessel and drifted across the riverbanks where crowds gathered in astonishment. The entire city abandoned Antony's formal reception to witness the spectacle. He sat alone in the forum while his intended subject drew every eye in Tarsus. That evening, Antony went to her ship. He never truly left. Yet beneath the seduction lay calculation on both sides. Cleopatra offered money and grain and naval bases and legitimacy throughout the East. Antony offered the Roman legions she needed to secure her throne against all rivals. Two people who understood power had recognized each other completely. 7 years transformed alliance into empire. Cleopatra bore Antony 3 children, as their partnership deepened into something Rome could neither ignore nor forgive. The twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene arrived first, then young Ptolemy Philadelphus. Antony married Cleopatra by Egyptian sacred rite, while remaining legally wed to Octavia, sister of Octavian himself. The insult was deliberate and unmistakable. Together they waged campaigns across the East, expanding territory and accumulating power until they commanded resources rivaling Rome itself. Then in 34 BCE, they staged a ceremony that sealed their fate. In the great gymnasium of Alexandria, before crowds numbering in tens of thousands, Antony proclaimed Cleopatra Queen of Kings and her children rulers over Rome's eastern client states. Alexander Helios received Armenia and the lands beyond. Cleopatra Selene gained Cyrenaica and Libya. Young Ptolemy Philadelphus was granted Syria and Asia Minor. Most explosive of all, Antony declared Caesarion the true and legitimate son of Julius Caesar. This single pronouncement challenged everything Octavian had built his power upon. In Rome, Octavian seized his opportunity with ruthless precision. He obtained Antony's will through bribery and read it before the horrified Senate. Antony wished to be buried in Alexandria beside Cleopatra. He had recognized Caesarion. He had given Roman territories to foreign children. Rome erupted in outrage, carefully stoked by Octavian's agents. The Senate declared Antony a public enemy, but Octavian framed the conflict brilliantly. This was not civil war against a fellow Roman, but righteous war against Cleopatra, the foreign witch queen who had enslaved their general. They assembled a force meant to conquer the world. Antony and Cleopatra gathered legions hardened by Eastern campaigns, cavalry from client kingdoms across Asia, and the Egyptian fleet, whose massive warships dwarfed anything Rome could build. By 32 BCE, this armada had positioned itself in Greece, poised to strike across the Adriatic and seize Italy itself. On parchment, their victory seemed inevitable. Reality proved far crueler. The campaign stalled before it truly began. Antony's Roman officers chafed at serving alongside a foreign queen whose presence at war councils violated every tradition they held sacred. Whispered resentments grew into open hostility. Why should Roman legionaries die for Egypt's ambitions? Desertions began as trickles then swelled to floods. Senators and generals who had followed Antony for years slipped away to Octavian's camp, carrying with them detailed knowledge of battle plans and troop positions. Meanwhile, Octavian's Admiral Agrippa proved devastatingly effective. His swift galleys raided supply lines with impunity, cutting off grain shipments and isolating the massive army from reinforcement. At Actium, the situation grew desperate. Malarial swamps surrounded their coastal encampment. Supplies rotted in summer heat. Soldiers sickened by thousands. Tension between Egyptian sailors and Roman legionaries threatened violence daily. Cleopatra urged a naval engagement where her great ships might prove decisive. Antony wavered, torn between his Roman identity demanding land battle and his Egyptian alliance demanding the sea. His hesitation proved fatal. The trap had already closed around them. On September 2nd, in 31 BCE, the fleets clashed in waters that would decide the world's fate. Antony and Cleopatra's warships rowed out from the Gulf of Actium to meet Octavian's forces in a battle both sides knew would end the war. The fighting began fierce and brutal as massive vessels rammed and grappled in the narrow strait. Arrows darkened the sky. Firepots arced between ships. Men screamed and drowned in waters churning with wreckage. Yet for hours, neither side gained clear advantage. The chaos of ancient naval warfare defied command. Smoke obscured vision. Signals went unseen. Captains fought their own desperate struggles with no sense of the larger battle. Then something happened that ancient sources never adequately explain. Cleopatra's squadron of 60 ships suddenly hoisted sail and broke through the Roman line, fleeing south toward Egypt with the treasury aboard. Moments later, Antony abandoned his flagship, transferred to a swift galley, and followed her. Roman historians claimed he chased his lover in mad obsession, abandoning loyal soldiers to their doom. Modern scholars propose alternatives. Perhaps this was the plan all along. Escape with enough wealth to fight another day once the battle turned hopeless. Perhaps Cleopatra saw what Antony could not, that defeat was already inevitable. Regardless of motive, the result proved catastrophic. Antony's fleet surrendered. His legions, stranded on shore, negotiated terms with Octavian within days. The war that would decide the ancient world ended not in glory, but in mystery. The first great uncertainty in a story that ends with more questions than answers. They returned to Alexandria as rulers of ashes. The empire Antony and Cleopatra had built collapsed with terrifying speed in the months following Actium. Client kings who had sworn eternal loyalty now rushed to make peace with Octavian. Armies that had marched under their banners melted into the desert or defected outright. The dream of Eastern Empire dissolved like morning mist over the Nile. Antony sank into black despair. He built a small dwelling on the harbor and called it his Timonium after the famous Athenian misanthrope, withdrawing from court and company alike. He drank heavily and stared across waters that had witnessed his humiliation. But Cleopatra refused such surrender. She became frantically, furiously active. Ancient sources record that she began testing poisons on condemned prisoners, observing which substances killed quickly and painlessly without leaving disfiguring marks. She was gathering knowledge, preparing for possibilities she hoped to avoid, but refused to leave to chance. Simultaneously, she stockpiled Egypt's treasury within her great mausoleum, surrounding the gold with kindling and torches. If Octavian wanted Egypt's wealth, he would have to negotiate or watch it burn. Letters flew between Alexandria and Rome. Cleopatra offered to abdicate if her children could inherit Egypt. She sent gold and gifts and desperate diplomacy. Octavian's responses remained carefully ambiguous, encouraging enough to prevent rash action, promising nothing concrete. He needed her alive and cooperative until he could secure the treasure. She was leverage, nothing more. Both understood the game perfectly. Octavian's legions reached Alexandria in August of 30 BCE, and the final act began. Antony roused himself from despair for one last desperate gamble. He led his remaining cavalry in a sortie against the advancing Romans, seeking the glorious death that had eluded him at Actium. Instead, he found betrayal. His horsemen defected mid-charge, wheeling to join the enemy. The fleet he had rebuilt surrendered without loosing a single arrow. Every institution Antony had trusted collapsed in hours. He returned to the palace raving that Cleopatra had sold him to Octavian. The accusation was likely false, but anguish needs no logic. Cleopatra fled to her mausoleum, barricaded the doors, and sent word to Antony that she was dead. Perhaps she sought to shock him from his rage. Perhaps she genuinely feared his violence. The message achieved something far more terrible. Antony drew his sword and drove it into his own belly. The wound was mortal, but not immediately fatal. As he lay bleeding, servants brought word that Cleopatra lived. He begged to see her one final time. The mausoleum's lower doors were sealed, so servants hauled his broken body up through upper windows on ropes. Cleopatra strained at the lines herself, weeping as she pulled her dying lover to her. He expired in her arms, his blood soaking her robes. Now she was alone, trapped in a tomb of her own making, with a corpse growing cold. Roman soldiers battered at the doors below. 11 days remained until her death. Roman soldiers broke through the mausoleum's defenses while Cleopatra still clutched Antony's body. Ancient accounts claim she seized a dagger and tried to end her life, but was disarmed before the blade could strike. She was now Octavian's prisoner, the prize he had pursued across years and thousands of miles. What followed defies military logic. Octavian did not remove Cleopatra to secure quarters where Roman guards could control every aspect of her confinement. Instead, he allowed her to remain within the mausoleum itself, a space she had designed, filled with her possessions, stocked with treasures and supplies she had gathered over months of preparation. He posted guards, including his freedman Epaphroditus, with orders to prevent her suicide. Yet she was permitted to keep her handmaidens, Iras and Charmion. She was allowed to embalm Antony's body according to Egyptian sacred rites. She retained access to chambers Romans had not thoroughly searched. The arrangement invites troubling questions. Why leave a suicidal prisoner in an environment she controlled, surrounded by loyal servants, with access to spaces that might contain hidden weapons or poisons? Either Roman security was catastrophically incompetent, or someone ensured Cleopatra retained certain options. Her physician Olympus remained with her throughout these 11 days. He later wrote an account of what he witnessed, now lost to history, though Plutarch references it. Whatever truly happened in that mausoleum, Olympus saw it. His silence in surviving sources speaks louder than any testimony. Octavian came to see his prisoner in person, and what transpired between them remains one of history's great enigmas. Plutarch describes Cleopatra as grief-ravaged when the conqueror entered her chamber. She wore only a simple tunic and threw herself at his feet in apparent supplication. Yet the queen who had bent Caesar and Antony to her will had not entirely vanished. Ancient sources record her shifting from despair to argument, to displays of dignity and former majesty. She presented documents showing her loyalty to Caesar. She bargained for her children's futures. She deployed every weapon remaining in her arsenal. Octavian departed without making commitments but offering reassurances. He told her to take heart and fear nothing. Such words from such a man meant nothing at all. In the days following this meeting, Cleopatra's behavior transformed. A young Roman officer named Cornelius Dolabella, reportedly sympathetic to the fallen queen, sent her secret word that stripped away any remaining illusion. Octavian intended to transport her and her children to Rome within 3 days. She would be paraded in chains through jeering streets, displayed as the conquered enemy of civilization, then almost certainly executed. Cleopatra had suspected this fate, but suspicion differs from certainty. Now she knew. Her response came quickly and quietly. She sent Octavian a letter requesting permission to make offerings at Antony's tomb, a final farewell to her lover. A reasonable request from a grieving woman. Permission was granted. She had made her choice. On the morning of August 12th, Cleopatra rose and prepared for eternity. She bathed with ceremonial care and dressed in the full regalia of a pharaoh, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, robes of royal purple, the sacred cobra gleaming at her brow. She ate a final meal with deliberate calm. Her handmaidens Iras and Charmion attended her as they had for years, loyal beyond any promise of survival. Then a visitor arrived at the mausoleum. Ancient sources cannot agree whether he was a farmer or a merchant, but all describe what he carried. A simple basket filled with ripe figs. The guards examined the basket, saw only fruit glistening beneath green leaves, and allowed it inside. Within hours, all 3 women were dead. The sequence of events invites endless scrutiny. The doors remained locked from within. The windows were too small for entry or escape. Guards stood posted outside throughout, yet heard nothing unusual. When Octavian received Cleopatra's final letter requesting burial beside Antony, he sent men racing to the mausoleum. They arrived moments after death claimed her, or precisely when intended, depending on interpretation. The official Roman account claimed an asp lay hidden beneath those figs. Cleopatra pressed the serpent to her breast and embraced divine death. Yet the snake was never found, despite thorough searching. Some ancient writers mention faint marks on her arm. Others saw nothing at all. The sources hedge and qualify, using phrases like "some say" and "it is believed." Certainty dissolves into convenient narrative. Modern science has dismantled the serpent myth with clinical precision. Herpetologists studying Egyptian cobras describe a death that bears no resemblance to the peaceful scene Romans claimed to discover. Cobra venom is neurotoxic, attacking the nervous system over a period of hours, not minutes. Victims experience searing pain at the bite site, followed by progressive paralysis, uncontrollable vomiting, convulsions, and finally respiratory failure. The process is neither quick, nor quiet, nor dignified. Ancient witnesses described Cleopatra's body as most beautiful, arranged in perfect repose without visible distress or disfigurement. This description is medically incompatible with cobra envenomation. The problems multiply under scrutiny. A single cobra cannot reliably kill 3 adults. Snakes frequently deliver dry bites containing little or no venom, a risk any educated person would recognize. Cleopatra had spent months testing poisons on condemned prisoners, specifically seeking substances that killed without pain or visible trauma. She would never have staked her final act on something as unpredictable as a serpent's bite. Toxicologists propose alternatives far more consistent with evidence. Alexandrian medical schools possessed sophisticated knowledge of lethal compounds. Combinations of hemlock, opium, and aconitum could produce rapid, painless death, matching every witness description. The victim would simply slip into unconsciousness and stop breathing. German scholar Christoph Schaefer has argued persuasively that such a poison draft explains the physical evidence, while the cobra explains only Roman properties. The snake was never found, because the snake never existed. 2,000 years of investigation have produced 3 competing explanations for what happened in that sealed chamber. The first theory accepts the ancient narrative at face value. Cleopatra chose death by sacred serpent because the aspi carried profound Egyptian meaning. The uraeus cobra adorned every pharaoh's crown as symbol of divine authority and protection. To die by its bite was to die as a god, transformed rather than defeated. This interpretation requires accepting significant medical improbabilities and the convenient disappearance of the snake itself, but offers poetic truth even if literal facts remain elusive. The second theory proposes suicide by poison rather than serpent. Cleopatra spent her final months testing lethal compounds on prisoners, seeking painless death without disfigurement. She possessed the knowledge and resources to prepare such substances. The physical evidence, 3 peaceful bodies showing no trauma, matches poison far better than snakebite. Perhaps the cobra story was Roman invention, designed to diminish her agency. Or perhaps Cleopatra herself planted the serpent myth, to ensure her death carried divine symbolism, regardless of actual method. The third theory points toward murder. Octavian controlled every variable in that mausoleum. His guards stood watch. His freedman supervised access. He determined who entered and what they carried. The farmer bearing figs could have been his agent delivering death rather than concealing it. Cleopatra dead solved every problem Octavian faced. She could not become a martyr if she chose her own end. He could express public sorrow while privately celebrating the elimination of his most dangerous rival. The case for murder begins with a simple question. Who benefited most from Cleopatra's death? Octavian faced an impossible dilemma in those August days. He needed the queen eliminated, but could not be seen eliminating her. A living Cleopatra transported to Rome posed catastrophic risks he could barely calculate. She had seduced two of Rome's greatest men through sheer force of personality. Paraded through the streets, she might win sympathy from the Roman mob who loved spectacle, but often sided with its victims. She might become a symbol for every faction opposing his rule. Worse still, she knew secrets about Roman conduct in the East that would prove deeply embarrassing if spoken publicly, and yet executing her outright would make Octavian appear tyrannical, a despot murdering a defeated queen rather than a liberator restoring Roman honor. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. A Cleopatra who killed herself served every purpose. She became tragic rather than martyred. Octavian could express public sorrow and grant honorable burial while privately celebrating. Egypt's wealth flowed to Rome without controversy. Consider how completely Octavian controlled the narrative afterward. Every Roman historian who described these events wrote under his reign as Augustus. The physician Olympus composed an eyewitness account, but the original vanished, surviving only in fragments quoted by later writers. When Octavian received Cleopatra's final letter, he sent men running to the mausoleum. They arrived moments too late, or precisely on schedule. The most damning evidence may be the evidence that does not exist. Consider who witnessed Cleopatra's final moments. Iras died first, collapsed on the floor before the queen breathed her last. Charmion survived only seconds longer, strength fading as she straightened the royal diadem. Cleopatra herself carried her secrets into death. Every person inside that chamber perished. Every person outside that chamber served Octavian. The guards posted at the mausoleum heard nothing suspicious and saw nothing unusual until they broke through the doors to discover bodies already cooling. The physician Olympus attended Cleopatra throughout her captivity and almost certainly witnessed the death or its immediate aftermath. He wrote an account of those 11 days, referenced by Plutarch and other ancient writers. The original text has vanished completely. We possess only fragments quoted at second and third hand, carefully selected passages that support the official narrative. What did Olympus record that required suppression? The systematic elimination of witnesses extended beyond that single chamber. Cleopatra's servants and advisors disappear from history without trace. Her children were transported to Rome as trophies, raised by Octavian's own sister in deliberate erasure of their heritage. Caesarion, the 17-year-old son of Julius Caesar, was hunted down and executed on Octavian's direct orders. Too many Caesars is not good, his advisors reportedly counseled. The institutional memory of Ptolemaic Alexandria was methodically dismantled. What remains is only what Rome chose to preserve. The case for suicide carries its own compelling weight. Cleopatra possessed every element required for deliberate self-destruction. Her motive was absolute and undeniable. Dolabella's message confirmed what she had long suspected. Rome intended public humiliation, followed by execution. She would walk in chains behind Octavian's chariot, while crowds jeered at the foreign seductress who had corrupted their generals. Her children would watch their mother degraded before their own fates were sealed. Caesarion, her firstborn, the son of Julius Caesar himself, would certainly be killed. Too many Caesars endangered Octavian's claim. She had means prepared long in advance. Those months of testing poisons on condemned prisoners were not morbid curiosity, but practical preparation. She knew exactly which compounds killed quickly and peacefully. She had opportunity to conceal such substances throughout the mausoleum she controlled, hidden in compartments Roman soldiers never discovered. Most importantly, she had demonstrated willingness throughout her entire life. This was a woman who chose war over submission, exile over surrender, alliance with Rome's enemies over acceptance of client status. Every major decision revealed someone who would rather risk everything than accept defeat on another's terms. The manner of her death confirms this reading. She staged her final scene as carefully as her arrival at Tarsus decades before, dressed in full royal regalia, positioned in serene repose, attended by loyal servants who chose death alongside their queen. Even dying, she controlled the narrative, transformed defeat into apotheosis, became legend rather than victim. Perhaps the truth lies not in choosing between murder and suicide, but in recognizing how completely these categories can merge. A third interpretation accommodates the competing evidence more elegantly than either extreme. Octavian may have allowed Cleopatra to die while ensuring she possessed the means to do so. This assisted suicide preserved the appearance of her agency while guaranteeing the outcome he required. Consider the arrangement from both perspectives. Octavian needed Cleopatra dead, but could not execute her without appearing tyrannical. Cleopatra needed to die before reaching Rome, but could not easily obtain poison under Roman guard. The solution served both interests perfectly. Guards could be instructed to search carelessly. Visitors could be permitted to carry items uninspected. The farmer with his basket of figs may have been exactly what he appeared, an innocent merchant, or he may have been an agent serving either party or both, simultaneously. Roman tradition provided precedent for such arrangements. Defeated enemies of sufficient status were often permitted to take their own lives rather than face public execution. This grim courtesy preserved honor for the vanquished, while sparing the victor accusations of cruelty. Octavian may have extended precisely this option to Cleopatra through unspoken understanding rather than explicit agreement. The serpent story served everyone's purposes with elegant efficiency. Cleopatra gained a death saturated with divine Egyptian symbolism. Octavian gained deniability and clean hands. Rome gained a satisfying narrative of Eastern excess destroyed by Western virtue. The truth became irrelevant once the myth proved so universally useful. With Cleopatra's body still warm, Octavian moved to eliminate every remaining threat her bloodline posed. Caesarion, 17 years old, and bearing the unmistakable features of Julius Caesar himself, had fled south toward Ethiopia, seeking sanctuary beyond Roman reach. His tutors betrayed him with false promises of safety and negotiated return. Octavian's advisors reportedly counseled that too many Caesars was not a good thing. The boy was executed immediately. Julius Caesar's only biological son, heir to both Rome's greatest general and Egypt's ancient throne, vanished from history without ceremony or memorial. Cleopatra's 3 children by Antony received a different fate, spared for purposes of propaganda rather than mercian. The 10-year-old twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, along with 6-year-old Ptolemy Philadelphus, were transported to Rome in chains. They walked in Octavian's triumph, while crowds gawked at an effigy of their dead mother, a mechanical serpent clasped to its golden breast. Afterward, they were placed in the household of Octavia, Antony's abandoned Roman wife, raised among children of the man who had destroyed their world. The boys simply disappear from historical record, almost certainly dead before reaching adulthood. Only Cleopatra VII survived, eventually married to King Juba II of Mauritania, where she became queen and bore children carrying the mingled blood of Ptolemies and Antonians. The dynasty that ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries ended not in glorious battle, but in quiet, bureaucratic extinction. Egypt became something unprecedented in Roman history, not a province governed by the Senate, but personal property of Octavian himself. He recognized what Cleopatra had always understood. Whoever controlled Egypt's grain controlled Rome's survival. Whoever possessed Egypt's gold could finance empire without limit. He forbade senators from even visiting without explicit permission, ensuring no rival could build a power base from Alexandria's wealth. For 4 centuries, Egypt would remain imperial territory, its harvests feeding Roman masses, its treasures funding Roman ambitions, its ancient institutions preserved but hollowed of genuine authority. The temples continued their rituals. The priests maintained their ceremonies. But real power flowed to Roman prefects, answering only to the emperor. Cleopatra herself was systematically erased and rewritten. Workers defaced her cartouches on temple walls, chiseling away the hieroglyphs that proclaimed her divinity. Statues were removed or recarved into acceptable Roman forms. The great poets of Augustan Rome composed verses depicting her as everything Roman virtue opposed. Horace called her a fatal monster, drunk on fortune's sweetness. Virgil's Aeneid portrayed her as a corrupting Eastern influence nearly destroying civilization. Propertius wrote of her shameful demands and degraded schemes. She became the witch queen, the seductress, the embodiment of everything Rome claimed to have conquered. Yet even in demonization, her power survived. Rome's poets would not have worked so furiously to diminish her if she had not been genuinely terrifying. She became their favorite villain precisely because she had come so close to victory. Return one final time to that chamber in August of 30 BCE, the golden couch, the queen in royal regalia, the handmaidens fallen at her feet, the guards who heard nothing, the snake that was never found, the basket of figs that may have carried death or merely fruit, the letter requesting burial beside Antony, the conqueror who sent men running, yet arrived too late. What do we actually know with certainty after 2,000 years of investigation? Cleopatra died on August 12th. Iras and Charmion died beside her. Octavian benefited from her death more than any person alive. Every account that survives was written by her enemies or their successors under patronage of the man who built an empire from her ashes. The physician's testimony vanished. The servants were silenced. The children were scattered or killed. We cannot know whether she chose the moment or Rome accelerated it, or whether some silent agreement made the question meaningless. Perhaps that ambiguity represents her final victory. Her conquerors possessed her kingdom and her treasure and her children. They rewrote her story and defaced her monuments and transformed her into a cautionary tale for Roman wives. Yet they never possessed the truth. She remained a mystery they could not solve, a question that outlasted their empire by millennia. Somewhere beneath modern Alexandria, her tomb may still wait, buried under centuries of construction, never excavated, never found. The answer to how she died, perhaps resting beside her bones. History remembers the serpent, but that was always the story we were meant to believe.